Okay, this next story is so sordid and bizarre and so disturbing that I struggled with exactly how to lay it out for you in the simplest and clearest terms. And the clearest way is actually not chronologically, it's almost backwards and then coming back to the present. So last week or the week before, we learned that New England Patriots, the football team, the New England Patriots, the owner, Bob Kraft, was arrested for soliciting prostitution at a spa in Florida. And we know that Donald Trump is good friends with Bob Kraft. He said he was surprised and saddened by the news about Kraft soliciting prostitution. Okay. Then we learned that the spa massage parlor where this took place, which is now called Orchids of Asia Day Spa, has been implicated not only in prostitution, but potentially in a sex trafficking ring. Now, this is actually a sex trafficking ring. This is unlike Pizzagate or whatever else. This is actually maybe a sex trafficking operation, according to what authorities are saying. It used to be owned by a 45-year-old Chinese woman named Li Yang. And that's the second connection to Donald Trump for this story, because Kraft was busted there, and Kraft is Trump's friend. Li Yang used to own it, and Li Yang happened to watch the Super Bowl with Donald Trump at the White House recently. Okay, but fine, no big deal, because even though Li Yang knows Trump now, and she doesn't own the place, and she insists she never did anything illegal, her presence with Trump is mere coincidence. It doesn't really matter. Trump is in pictures with millions of people, as Sarah Huckabee Sanders has previously told us. Except that Li Yang has moved from running massage parlor spas to selling access to the Trump family to Chinese business people. Now Li Yang, who goes by Cindy Yang, I'll call her that for the rest of the story, she and her husband run a company called GY US Investments LLC. They've done that since 2017. And this is a consulting firm which helps businesses in the United States expand in the Chinese marketplace. But interestingly, they also help Chinese businesses make high-level connections in the United States. That starts to get a little bit more interesting. They have pictures of Trump's Florida Mar-a-Lago resort, and they list that they have activities for clients which include getting the opportunity to interact with the president as well as the Minister of Commerce, I'm guessing they mean the Secretary of Commerce, and other political figures, and they can also help you set up White House and Capitol Hill dinners. They are selling access to the upper echelons of power in the United States, including the closest thing we have to a royal family right now, Trump and his family. The day that this story broke, all of a sudden, the GYUS Investments website stopped working. All of this material connecting them to Donald Trump has been pulled down off of the internet. We've been researching Cindy Yang, and it turns out that she's a member of the president's presidential fundraising committee. She donated a total of $60,000 to Donald Trump and to a PAC that supports him. Her Facebook page was filled with pictures of her and Don Jr. and Congressman Matthew Gaetz, who's a big Trump supporter, and Elaine Chao, the wife of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and Sarah Palin. Except that if you try to find that Facebook page now, it has also been taken down as the scope of this fiasco has continued to expand. And before the GYUS Investments website was taken down, it had a long list of events at Mar-a-Lago where you can mingle with Trump or his family members. Here's one such promotion saying that you can hang out with Donald Trump's sister. During the recent government shutdown, Donald Trump was scheduled to go hang out with these Chinese business people, but the trip was canceled over the shutdown, and Donald Trump ended up staying in Washington, D.C. But the business model here is very clear. The same woman who previously ran a massage parlor, which is now tied up in a prostitution sex trafficking ring where Bob Kraft, Trump's friend and owner of the Patriots, was arrested, they are selling access to Trump and his family. Here's a picture of Tang Hua, a president of some kind of automotive firm in China, with Eric Trump. We have a picture of Don Jr. with another Chinese business person in addition to Tang Hua. And before her Facebook page was taken down, Cindy Yang had multiple check-ins at the White House, at Mar-a-Lago, at Trump International DC hotels, at Trump's National Golf Course, at Trump Tower, New York City. It is stunning. So the headline here is that the person who used to own the illegal massage parlor where Trump friend Bob Kraft was arrested for soliciting prostitution is now running a business that sells access to Trump's family. This is a massive major story. If Barack Obama had been involved in 5% of this, on mere circumstance and suspicion alone, the right would be calling for his impeachment. But there are lots of other important stories here as well that go beyond just the Trump cronyism and corruption. There's a national security angle here. We know that there is significant Chinese infiltration with American businesses. And there are security concerns here. This is a story, of course, about crony capitalism, but it's also about how you can buy access to the president of the United States. But these Chinese consulting firms are so often mixed in with Chinese intelligence services and being able to so easily buy access to the president and his family at Mar-a-Lago is a national security risk. And then lastly, with the massage parlor, prostitution, spa portion of the entire thing, there's also the story of the legalization of sex work, which is another issue which we've discussed before. But that's the story in its full scope. It requires a whole suite of new investigations, which we might get. But at this point, the investigative capacity of our institutions is stretched almost to the max. And I wonder whether there's even going to be a proper and full investigation into this. We know Republicans are under no urgency to do such an investigation. Let me know what you think about this. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show, and I'll be back with much more right after this. Okay, this actually seems like a fake headline, but unfortunately it's real. Donald Trump has unleashed a brutal attack on complicated airplanes after the horrible tragedy involving a Boeing 737 MAX airplane flown by Ethiopian Airlines over the weekend. In a moment, I'll show you Donald Trump's statement about this, but I want to first sort of set it up for you. Yesterday, I interviewed psychiatrist John Gartner, who has been sounding the alarm from a mental health perspective on Donald Trump's behavior for close to a year at this point, if not longer. And what Dr. Gartner believes is that Donald Trump's behavior is indicative of some combination of cognitive decline, mental illness, a pre-dementia state, or some, again, combination thereof. And we talked about a bunch of examples yesterday. We talked about Tim Apple. We talked about Shrushlam and God bless the United States of America. We talked about Trump walking away at a bill signing without signing the bill. There's so many other examples of this. And just within hours of this interview with Dr. John Gartner yesterday, we have a new example right in our faces. Donald Trump took to Twitter yesterday and went on a broad-based attack against modern aviation technology and complexity, arguing that we need to go backwards in aviation tech, which of course makes no sense as aviation is safer today than it has absolutely ever been, according to the numbers. Doesn't matter to Trump. Let's take a look at what he tweeted yesterday, starting with, airplanes are becoming far too complex to fly. Pilots are no longer needed, but rather computer scientists from MIT. I see it all the time in many products, always seeking to go one unnecessary step further, when often old and simpler is far better. Split-second decisions are needed, and the complexity creates danger. All of this for great cost, yet very little gain. I don't know about you, but I don't want Albert Einstein to be my pilot. I want great flying professionals that are allowed to easily and quickly take control of a plane. This is absolutely outrageous. The world is laughing at us because our president understands nothing and is proactively damaging. He's doing harm by virtue of the statements that he makes. So let's see if we can break this down piece by piece. And you tell me, Pat, if I'm missing any important element of this. First of all, aviation has never been safer, okay? The older, simpler planes Trump is talking about crashed more often. Automated flight controls of different kinds date back to the early 20th century. Now, what Trump may be referring to, although I don't even know why I'm being so charitable here, may be some elements of what are called fly-by-wire systems where flight controls are not physically manipulating elements of the airplane that control flight, but are doing so through effectively a computer, through electronic means of different kinds. And of course, anytime you introduce some kind of technology, there's a risk that that technology will fail. But accounting for all of the redundancies and systems that are in place to safeguard against that, aviation is safer than ever. If we want to tie Trump to this on one side or the other, you could make the case that his shutdown a few months ago slowed down repairs and updates to planes by hampering the agencies that are involved in aviation safety. So on the one hand, he's completely wrong that there's a concern about aviation becoming more dangerous. On the other hand, if it's not gotten safer at the fastest possible rate, we could point to Trump's shutdown as at least one possible reason here. And then, of course, there's also just the incredible hypocrisy, Pat, of the fact that there's no more complicated plane than Air Force One, which is a Boeing 747, which he flies weekly, if not multiple times per week, which, in addition to all of the normal complexity of that plane, has all sorts of additional systems, including one that allows for mid-air refueling in case of some emergency where Trump needs to stay in the air for who knows how long, communication system, medical systems, etc. This is just dumb on every level.
I really don't think it's even worth playing point counterpoint with this one. I think it's just Trump's ego getting the best of him. He views himself as an authority figure on almost everything. Like there are those clips of him saying that no one knows more about taxes than me. No one knows more about campaign finance than me. Apparently the same thing is true for aviation. He doesn't know what he doesn't know, and he has the resources to reach out to people who actually do know about this stuff. Like he could contact the head of the FAA if he wanted to, but he'd rather not. He'd rather just tweet based on his impulses on these things.
Yeah, well, this is weaponized ignorance once again. And Pat's right. I mean, the biggest problem isn't that Trump doesn't know anything about a lot of the things he talks about. That is a problem, don't get me wrong, but that's not necessarily the biggest problem. The problem is he's the president. He believes he's an expert on everything, and therefore he doesn't listen to actual experts. As far as the Boeing 737 MAX, I mean, there's an issue with the Boeing 737 MAX, okay? It needs to be sorted out. Many tragic deaths as a result. There's no denying that whatsoever. Two crashes within a 5-month period of the same version of the 737 MAX happening shortly after takeoff with sort of erratic altitude changes. So there's an issue here and it needs to be sorted out. But Trump's commentary is coming from a place of total ignorance. Maybe he thinks if it's too complicated for him to understand that no one could understand it. That's another interpretation. But what you end up with is tweets like this, and it's bad for the aviation industry. It's bad for the tourism industry. It's bad just for people who have anxiety about flying, which is a lot of people, and it's embarrassing on an international level. So there's clearly something very, very wrong with this man, whether it's what Dr. John Gartner pointed out yesterday, personality disorder, delusions of grandeur, or some combination thereof. Maybe we will someday be able to better sort out, but this is extraordinarily erratic behavior. Make sure you're following The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. The rejected voicemail segment that we have piloted on our Instagram page, people are loving it. I'm getting tweets and emails about it. What we do is we get like 100 voicemails a day, or some, maybe even more if you consider both phone numbers that we have, and the fact that on weekends they also continue accruing. We only play a handful of voicemails on the broadcast show each week, but we have taken some what we are calling rejected voicemails that are just wacky or unusual in some way, shape, or form, and we're publishing them subtitled to our Instagram page at David Pakman Show. So check that out by following at David Pakman Show on Instagram. While you're there, follow me as well, david.pakman on Instagram. We will take a break, and next I'm going to speak to Hannah Gurman, who's a professor at New York University. We're going to get into whistleblowing and leaking. What is the difference between the two? How have different administrations handled whistleblowers and leakers? Why is this so important to a free, independent, and strong press? All of those questions and more we will deal with Hannah Gurman right after this short break. Fox News host Tucker Carlson is really good at many things. And one of those things is couching what we all on the left suspect are really unsavory and disgusting political opinions as sort of rock solid, logical expressions of just where the facts take Tucker Carlson. And he does this so well that he's really good at appearing not to be a hateful conservative, but a compassionate one, someone who is led to conservative policy, not by pejorative beliefs about others, but because common sense and his desire for everything to be better for everyone has led him to be a conservative. That's sort of the character he's developed on Fox News. It's pretty transparent. But Tucker's really good at it, and it's particularly effective with the Fox News audience that he caters to. He makes the Fox News audience feel like he and they are right-wing, not because they're bad people or their priorities are wrong or they are ignorant, but for nice, fluffy reasons that everybody can feel pretty good about. Except we know that lurking behind that are the same disgusting, unpolished ideas that we see at Donald Trump's rallies and that we see outside of CPAC. And case in point, there is some recently unearthed audio which features Tucker Carlson straight up saying women are primitive and just need to be quiet and do what they're told. It's shocking, but it's really not all that surprising when you actually remember Tucker Carlson years and years ago and what his career has actually been. Both of these clips are from the Bubba the Love Sponge show years and years ago, but not so long ago that Tucker Carlson wasn't an adult with beliefs that he came up with on his own. Take a listen to the first clip.
You know what, in my brief experience, what gets women going is arguing with them.
Really?
Yeah.
Brad, I never use that.
It's true. You debate politics with a woman and just go, just full-blown out there, especially feminism. If you're talking to a feminist and she's giving you, men really need to be more sensitive and this. Actually, men don't need to be more sensitive. You just need to be quiet and kind of do what you're told.
And lighten up a little bit, bitch.
They love it.
And then we get to the part about women being primitive.
So, hey, let's go crazy. Wow.
That if it weren't my daughter,
that's
I'd
one theory.
that.
Well, I mean, it's
I just can't, and I just think that's pretty unlikely.
Can you tell them, as outlandish as that is, how old is your daughter?
14.
Well, I love women, but they're extremely primitive. They're basic. They're not that hard to understand.
Okay, so now what, right? Well, Tucker Carlson has put out a tweet about this where he says, quote, "Media Matters caught me saying something naughty on a radio show more than a decade ago. Rather than express the usual ritual contrition, how about this? I'm on television every weeknight live for an hour. If you want to know what I think, you can watch." So opting not to do one of these bogus apologies, which people often do. I totally understand his reasoning there. And taking this as an opportunity to plug his show. So what should happen? I've been getting emails from people saying, David, are you going to call for Tucker Carlson's firing? David, are you going to call for an ad boycott of Tucker Carlson? No, I'm not. I mean, I'm not suggesting Tucker Carlson be fired for this. These are common beliefs among Tucker Carlson and a lot of people in his audience and a lot of the Fox News audience. Why would they fire him for merely reflecting what the views are of the audience? I'm not going to call for an advertiser boycott of Tucker Carlson if advertisers understand that these are Carlson's views and these are the views of a lot of his audience. If they don't mind being associated with them, it's still probably a pretty good financial decision to advertise with Tucker Carlson. So I'm not calling for an ad boycott either. I'm guessing that a bunch of Tucker's new friends, if Tucker Carlson were to be targeted for a firing or for an ad boycott or whatever, would say this is another example of the triggered language policing left who are trying to get him fired just over jokes and it's censorship and free speech and blah, 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 First Amendment. Let's just all agree that we understand this is the underlying ideology here, period. The facade of the smart, logical, triggering the libs, non-ugly conservatism of Carlson, who's this great debater and has the moral high ground and the factual high ground, it's just fake, okay? He's just that. He is a facade for the exact right-wing beliefs that we know underlie their ideology, period. He doesn't have to be fired. Fox News probably is hiring him or hired him because of that, not despite that. If you go and look at the comments on articles about this leaked or unearthed audio, I guess is a better, leak doesn't really make sense, unearthed audio on Reddit and on the Daily Beast and everywhere that's writing about it, you will find the comment section riddled with people who say, Tucker is right. He should be applauded. There's nothing wrong with what he's saying. Women are primitive. They should just be quiet and do what they're told. There's nothing wrong with what Tucker is saying, and if you find it offensive, it's because you're a triggered liberal that can't handle the truth. So let's skip the Tucker should be fired. Tucker is exactly where he should be. These views and Fox News and Fox News' audience is exactly where this stuff all makes sense and is sort of harmonious. And it's just up to advertisers to decide whether they're okay with it. And if they are, it's going to continue to be profitable for them to advertise on Fox News. Evaluate Tucker on the reality of what he actually stands for, rather than this vague notion of a guy who has simply been driven by the facts to be a conservative. And then we can move on with our day and continue consuming the media that we find is useful or relevant to us. If you disagree with me, if you think we should be calling for his firing or for an ad boycott, let me know. I'm on Instagram at david.pakman. The show is on Instagram at David Pakman Show. Donald Trump has presented his proposed White House budget, and it's outrageous in every way. It's the largest budget ever, $4.75 trillion. Now, of course, we're all adults here. We all know about inflation. We all know about a growing economy. It would make sense that in raw numbers over time, as the country grows, as more and more people live in a country, in raw dollars, budgets would realistically continue to get larger and larger. However, it's the specifics of what's cut and what is increased that are, I would argue, downright immoral. To begin with, I told you a while ago that Republicans were, and Trump specifically, were setting up to use the deficit they've exploded to justify cutting Medicare and Medicaid. In other words, they blow up the deficit and then they say, hey, we've got this huge deficit to deal with now. We've got to cut Medicaid, we've got to cut Medicare, and maybe even Social Security. And they are doing it. But let's first start with what is increased in Donald Trump's proposed budget that was released yesterday, totaling $4.75 trillion. The first increase from Donald Trump's budget is a 5% increase to military spending. Not only immoral, but wasteful economically. We already have by far the largest military in the world. We already have more than enough firepower and weaponry to destroy the world many times over, more than would ever be needed. This is a proverbial or metaphorical penis size contest. Of course, throwing in there $8.6 billion for the U.S.-Mexico border wall, which, remember, he is not easily going to get from the people in the House and Senate that actually decide on getting him the money. A $700 million line item for school safety. Now, they are claiming that this does not contain any firearms requirements, but we really need to dig into the specifics of how it's worded to get a sense of whether the idea here is to crowbar some money in for guns in schools, which of course be an absolute disaster. Funding for dealing with opioid addiction, that's a good thing. 10% increase to veteran health care, which is of course fine, but we have to consider the total funding for all types of health care, and we can't fully do that until we talk about what is being cut. Education voucher program, which is once again a handout to those who are looking to cripple public education and to provide money to charter schools and private schools, etc. Total disaster. And $200 billion for infrastructure. As we know, infrastructure spending in general is stimulative. It's necessary. We have aging infrastructure in the United States. But the way that Donald Trump wants to do infrastructure spending is a crony capitalist handout to his friends, and the way things have been going, probably relatives as well. So these are the notable Trump budget increases. Let's look now at the other side of the ledger, which is what is being cut, either partially or fully, in Donald Trump's proposed $4.75 trillion budget that we saw yesterday. Starting with $1.9 trillion in cuts to various safety net programs, which includes cuts in funding for both Medicaid and Medicare. There it is. I told you a year ago they blew up the budget, and they would later say they blew up the deficit. Rather, the deficit's so big that we now need to start cutting Medicaid and Medicare. That is exactly what the Trump administration is proposing. But not just that, also a $26 billion cut to the Social Security disability program. The Trump budget wants to save $327 billion by adding some new work requirements for adult food stamp and housing recipients. They believe that will kick off a bunch of people from those programs, saving them $327 billion. Donald Trump wants to cut funding for the Environmental Protection Agency by 31%. Last thing we should be doing right now as we more and more rapidly destroy our planet. A $500 million cut to NASA, which I disagree with ideologically, but also even if you're a sort of national security conservative, you should want to fund NASA because so much of what NASA does, so much of space exploration and research, for better or worse, leads to technologies and developments that are useful for national security. 70% cut to renewable energy research, exactly opposite what our priorities should be. Eliminates climate change programs at multiple agencies. So different agencies within them have elements of climate change related research. Trump specifically is eliminating funding for those programs within many of these agencies. This includes a 14% cut to the Interior Department. This includes a 10% cut to the Education Department. And then there are a bunch of little cuts. You could call it death by 1,000 paper cuts to programs like low-income after-school programs, public service loan forgiveness, subsidized Stafford loans, and work study. Absolute disaster. Another interesting thing, I guess, is maybe a word for it, is that Trump is proposing a way to cut spending on prescription drugs, which President Obama already tried and actually failed with. So it's almost like taking a part of Obama's healthcare reform that didn't work and just trying to breathe life back into it, sort of like he's tried to do with the coal industry. Now, you might recall that Donald Trump promised to pay off the national debt within 8 years, if given 8 years as president. This budget, if it were approved, would not balance for 15 years, guaranteed. We would maintain massive deficits for 15 years. We can debate whether deficits are good, bad, medium, or it depends. But the promise was that he would pay off the debt in 8 years. Instead, he's doing the opposite by virtue of these proposals and tax policy and trade policy and increasing that deficit. He claims that free college and health care for all are just too expensive, but those things make sense. And instead, we're adding 5% to the military budget, not only unnecessary, but immoral and a complete misuse of resources. Now, I'm getting to the thing a lot of people are waiting for me to say, which is Congress actually determines spending, right? Congress will ultimately determine spending levels. This is what Trump is asking for. Presidents never get exactly what they ask for in White House budgets. This is a starting point. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the House and Senate to decide how we are going to be spending taxpayer money. Democrats in both the House and Senate already say that this budget is dead on arrival. You might recall that even when Republicans controlled both the House and Senate for the first part of Donald Trump's presidency, Trump's budgets were not passed as submitted. With Democrats now controlling the House, this obviously is not going to pass as submitted. It's a political document. I don't even think Republicans would dream of Medicare cuts as we're ramping up to the 2020 election. I am sure that they value self-preservation enough to realize that's a bad idea. But as proposed, let's take it at face value, as in this is what Trump proposed because this is what he wants. It's flagrantly irresponsible and also completely destructive if it were to become a reality.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I am Farron Cousins from Ring of Fire, sitting in for David Pakman today. You can find me on YouTube at youtube.com/The Ring of Fire or follow me on Twitter at Farron Balanced. You know, One of the things I love about some of these Trump supporters out there is that they are just so rabid in their defense of the president that they don't care if they make sense. In fact, some of them don't even care if their defense of the president and their desperation to take down Democrats ends up causing them to break the law. And in case you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, I am of course referring to Jacob Wohl, everybody's favorite pro-Donald Trump Twitter troll. Or at least he was until he got booted off of Twitter for creating a bunch of fake accounts. And it's actually those fake accounts that cost him his Twitter feed that also could land him in legal jeopardy. Here's what's happened. Jacob Wohl recently took a trip to Minnesota along with the right-wing provocateurs Ali Alexander and Laura Loomer. Their goal was to make this documentary film where they were going to expose how Representative Ilhan Omar married her own brother so that he could become a U.S. citizen. That was the goal of this documentary. And along the way, Jacob Wohl, as part of the film that is now released, goes to the police office. Not because of what Representative Omar allegedly did, but because he received a death threat on Twitter. And I've seen the screenshots of it. It's a pretty disgusting message that he has received from a man by the name of Drake Holmes. The only problem is when he reported this death threat to the police, which he did in the documentary, and they showed the screenshot of these messages and that dude's face is right there, he didn't know that in between the time of filming this and airing it to the public, that he would get busted for all of the fake accounts he created. So how did Jacob Wohl's fake Twitter accounts tie into Drake Holmes? Well, the simple fact that Drake Holmes was a pseudonym, or shouldn't even say pseudonym, it was a fake account created by Jacob Wohl. Jacob Wohl, by all available evidence, created a fake account on Twitter just to send himself a death threat so that he could make it look like liberals were after him. His life was in danger. He didn't know what he was going to do, so he files a police report, says, please look into this. Find this Drake Holmes guy who somehow accidentally misspelled his own name and his Twitter handle, by the way. Jacob Wohl is a serial liar, okay? We know that. The story came out last week or week before, whenever it was, that the woman he alleged had been sexually assaulted by Robert Mueller, the special prosecutor, came out and said, yeah, it never happened. They told me to do this. They actually tricked me into doing this, and that's why I ran away. I had to physically get away from him, which is what happened in the airport right before, if you all remember his little press conference that he did, it fell apart. His allegations against Robert Mueller fell apart, just like his claims of being threatened have fallen apart. The only difference is what he's done in this case, assuming he did do it, it's 100% illegal. It's exactly what Jussie Smollett allegedly did and has now been arrested for and appeared in court again today to have to answer for. The same thing has to happen to Jacob Wohl at this point. And to be honest, I think an investigation needs to be launched to find out what Ali Alexander and Laura Loomer knew as well, because they were in cahoots with Jacob Wohl. And I find it highly unlikely that these two provocateurs did not know that their little compatriot sitting next to them in their little trip to Minnesota hadn't created fake accounts, hadn't sent himself death threats, and then helped him film it and report it to the police. No, this is bigger than just one Twitter idiot. I think those other two were involved, and I think in order to find out whether or not they were, we need to have a proper investigation of this. And Ali Alexander claims, oh, I'm going to investigate this. Oh, I hope I wasn't taken for a fool. I've been up against Ali in a debate. And let me tell you, it's not that hard to debunk everything the guy says. I did it live on the air. Actually had to pull up info on my phone because he refused to believe that I was right, and I had to show it to him. I said, no, you are wrong and you're lying. Be honest for once. I don't think he's being honest about this. I don't think Jacob Wohl is being honest. And what Jacob Wohl has done here with filing this fake police report is 100% criminal. Let's also not overlook the fact that the guy is being investigated by federal authorities for his fake accusation against Robert Mueller. Jacob Wohl needs help. And I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm saying that if you go through what he was saying on Twitter, like his weird, crazy, obsessive responses to Donald Trump, I truly believe that this kid needs some help. There's something wrong. You know, I don't know what it is. I don't know what the answer is, but this kid needs to be in therapy because he needs to get to the root of what is happening to him and find the answers. He is so desperate to defend the president and try to take down the left that he's willing to break the law to do it. A normal person doesn't think in that manner, but Jacob Wohl does. Hopefully, Jacob Wohl does get taken into custody, because I believe he needs to be in custody. Not just for these crimes he may have committed, but because this kid is seriously a little bit not right, and he needs some therapy so they can help him and make him better. There's still hope, there's still a chance. But he's got to get to the root of his problems instead of trying to take down everyone, even if it's illegal, in order to defend the president.
Dozens of wealthy parents have been indicted in a college admissions scandal, about 50 people total. It includes some famous actors and actresses like Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin. The mom from Full House has been indicted. Charges for the 50 people, roughly 50 people, include bribery and fraud, all meant to get their kids into good colleges and universities, presumably better colleges and universities than their grades, intellect, and extracurricular activities would have otherwise gotten them into. Big name schools are involved here: Yale, Stanford, USC, other schools. And there were a few different methods used. Sometimes it involved paying college coaches, including to get them to say that their kids are not only good at a sport that maybe they play, but even good at sports that they don't play at all, creating staged pictures, rowing, for example, and getting a coach to say, yeah, this is a great rower. We should allow them to come to the school, which of course circumvents the normal sort of academic admission requirements. Another version of the scam, another side of the scam, was paying either consultants or exam administrators to sometimes let smarter people take tests for their kids. Another version of it was you would get fraudulent documents to justify extra time for test taking, like on SATs, on the basis of a learning disability that didn't really exist. And then the proctor of the test would be in on the scam, and sometimes they would be the ones completing the test for the student. So there are a bunch of different versions of this and a bunch of different sides to it, but we're talking about really big money here. Sometimes a total of more than $1 million per student, could be as cheap as $50,000 for a test score, could be as much as $200,000 for those fake sports credentials that I mentioned. And this is criminal. In some cases, this is horrible. I don't think you're teaching your kids any good lessons here, but you know what, Pat? You are sort of teaching them realistic ones, which are that money and connections can get people elite status, whether or not they've earned it. And that's actually a realistic life lesson.
And in theory, conservatives should be against this because this is essentially a handout. It's not as if the students are achieving things based on their own merits. They just so happen to have wealthy parents. And, you know, this is how wealth is able to stay in families for generations. We don't live in a true meritocracy. Of the 400 richest Americans, according to Forbes, 60% of them inherited their wealth. And it starts with this. It starts with parents getting their kids into wealthy schools, and then it goes from there.
Now, let's be very clear here. What we're now talking about, indictments, is over the line into criminality. But of course, a system that is so broken to begin with, as is our education system and our socioeconomic system, it's obviously going to be ruined by corruption. And what I mean by that is the following. In this particular case, we have crimes dealing with front businesses, a guy named William Singer, who was sort of facilitating a bunch of what was being done here. And we could spend an hour just talking about the details of this illegal version of this influence and sort of elite family and wealth vicious circle that exists. But think about how not surprising it is in the context of the larger educational system. College sports, okay? College sports are already rife with corruption. It's been like that for decades. Some of it legal and some of it illegal. Maybe corruption is not the right term. Cronyism and the type of stuff that we're talking about. The college cost infrastructure is completely out of control, and it is reinforced and perpetuated in a vicious cycle by the fact that it's easier and easier to get student loans with which you can pay schools more and more money for room and board every single year. Student lending in and of itself, riddled with predatory victimization of students, completely unsustainable in every way, and allowing students to go further and further into debt in fields that will eventually never really allow them to pay off those loans because of wage stagnation. Legacy admissions, another practice that just reinforces this elitism that Pat is talking about. And then you get to where it starts to get more borderline, right? So the use of consultants to help families with advice, totally legal. That also is an unequal advantage. Many, or probably most people, can't afford to pay college consultants to help get them into college. So then you go from just advice about how your essay should be written to someone who actually sits with you and writes the essay with you. Now we're talking about cheating, but is that illegal? And it's just a gray area sliding scale. Consider, for example, the golden boy, Jared Kushner. What about donating to a school and then your kids get in? Jared Kushner's father donated $2.5 million to Harvard right around the time that Jared Kushner was applying to Harvard. And then Jared Kushner, not surprisingly, got into Harvard. What's the difference? The difference is we've decided some of this stuff is criminal and some of it is not. And by the way, you think you have some idea now why Donald Trump doesn't want his grades or SAT scores released? I think this scandal actually tells us a lot about that. Do we believe that the Bush family is all geniuses who on the basis of intellect deserve to go to the schools that they went to? You be the judge. So the message for me here is crime is a social construction in the sense that society decides what is considered criminal and what isn't. Murder, okay, basically everybody agrees that should be criminal. But then you get into stuff like lobbying, political donations, influence peddling of different kinds, bribery, fraud, college consultants, etc. Some of the stuff is over the line and some of the stuff is not. And some of the actions in this college admissions scandal cross the line into what society has decided is criminality. I get it's not the same thing to donate a building to a school versus to pay an expert to write your kid's admission essay. I get that it's not the same. But if you do a serious analysis of the college system, both things we would expect to be going on in a system that's designed the way our system is used, and both are ways to use money to get a kid into a school that they might not otherwise get into. So there's a lot of criticism to go around, parents, coaches who accept the bribes, consultants who cross the line, but it's a rigged system. Some tactics are legal, some tactics are illegal, but it's not a sustainable system in any way, and it allows the rich to have special access to education, which gets them special access, privileged access to positions of authority, and we continue to have the same families dominating society. It's how the system works, period. What are you teaching your kids when you do this, even if they don't know? Not really sure. It's not how I would live my life if I had kids, and I think a lot of people in our audience probably share that point of view.